like watching comedians. I've watched lots of comedians over the years. I don't remember many of their jokes. Here's one of my favorite from Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld said this: survey after survey shows us that people's number one fear is public speaking. Their number one fear all the time is that they'd have to get up and speak. Public speaking is the number one fear. Number two is death. Number two is death. So he observed that if we were at a funeral, most people would rather be in the coffin than giving the eulogy, right? Okay, never mind. Anyway, that's still my favorite joke. I like that. Most people don't want to public speak. Public speaking doesn't bother me too much. I get a little nervous. That's a good thing. I like being a little nervous. That's all right. But public speaking doesn't bother me. If I had to think of something that would scare me, I would think about having to cook for you. If I had to cook for you, I wouldn't sleep for a week. Sarah's saying, yeah, Sarah's going away for a couple of days. Megan and I are going to survive, but I'm not a good cook. And if I had to cook for you, I wouldn't sleep for a week ahead of time. I'd worry about it completely until it was over, and even then I'd worry about it. I don't mind speaking, but I'd worry about that. What I want you to think about as we start this morning, I want you to think about something that would give you the sort of that ache in your stomach, that feeling like I'm going to run away if you had to do it. What would make you fearful? What would make you feel that way? Can you bring back that feeling of being told you've got to do something and you don't want to do it at all? Do you know that feeling? Come and tell me what it was later if you want to. We would have done it now, but we need the time. So if you've got that feeling, though, if you know what that would feel like to be scared and want to run away, you know what Timothy feels like. Which to me is very strange. Because when I think of Timothy, and when I think of Paul, and I think of Peter, and I think of other people, I think, you know what? I think those guys are brave. I think those guys are superhuman. They were never scared of anything. But Timothy actually was scared. Actually, Timothy was quite timid. Timothy was quite shy. Timothy wasn't sure that he was ready for the job that he was given. Paul had left him in Ephesus to sort out some problems in the church. Paul left him there to appoint elders and to do some other things. And Timothy's fearful. Timothy's a little worried. So Paul writes to him in 2 Timothy chapter 1, and he says this to him. He says, after talking about the faith that he had seen in Timothy that was in his grandmother and his mother, down in verse 6, he says this: for this reason I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God did not give us a spirit of timidity. God did not give us a spirit of fear, Timothy. You can't live out of fear. You can't live out of that feeling. You can't let that change who you are or determine what you're going to do. You can't live in a timid way. That's not who we are. So Paul says, you know what, Timothy, I know you're a little scared. I know you're a little worried, but here's the deal. Let me tell you what you've got. You can't live that way, but let me tell you what you are to live by. Let me tell you what you've been given. And he gives them three ideas. Three ideas that we need to take and hold on to as well, because I think Timothy is going to be shaped by these three things. If Timothy's going to do the job he's being asked to do, he's going to have to remember these three things. And I want to suggest to you today that if you are ever going to fulfill your role, the role that God uniquely has for you, if you're ever going to be who you should be, you can't live by fear. You can't run away. You can't say, I can't do it. Here's what you've got to think about. Here's what you've got to focus on. Timothy, God did not give us a spirit of timidity, but rather a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline. Let's talk about each of those for half a second. Timothy needs to remember the power that he's been given. Timothy needs to remember the power that he has. And I think if we as the church were to get one quality, one idea, one thing that would completely transform us, I would give us this gift. I would give us the gift of knowing the power we have. Because I'm convinced most of us don't realize what power we have. Most of us don't believe in a God that's still working today. Most of us don't believe in that something wonderful could happen because we focus on the wrong power. Instead of focusing on God's power, we think about what we can do. We think about our own power. We think about what we can push and what we can do and what we can say. But the Word is powerful. We're told that the Word is the sword of the Spirit. We're told, as Ron reminded us this morning, that the Spirit of God lives in us. And that Spirit will convict the world of sin. We're told that God hears our prayers and answers us. The God of the universe knows every hair on your head. The God of the universe sees this world so well that not a sparrow falls to the ground without His knowledge. The God of the universe knows you. And yet too often I live like I'm just on my own. Too often I live like I'm by myself. Too often I live by the wrong power. And Paul says to Timothy, Timothy, you've got to figure out the power you have. You've got to figure out what could happen. You've got to live by the right power, and it's not your own. Have you ever run out of gas? Larry and Teresa were coming over here on Friday night, and he said to me when I talked to him, he said, you know, we're coming along by Oxbow, and it was about 1 in the morning. I'm looking at the gas gauge thinking, I don't know if we're going to make it. If you run out of gas, you can push your car, right? You've done that, right? You know that. If you're on flat ground, you could push your car. Theoretically, 4 adults could have pushed their car from Oxbow if they had to, I guess. I guess the Oxbow Hill might have been an effort, probably. You can push your own car, right? It will roll, but it works so much better if you use the proper fuel. And I think for too many years, I tried to run by the wrong fuel. I tried to run by pushing the car. I thought it was up to me to make the church grow. I thought it was up to me to make things happen. I thought it was up to me to convince people. I thought it was up to me to do something. And it's not up to me. And it's not up to you, and it's not what we're going to do. And it's not what Timothy was going to do in Ephesus. It was what God was going to do through Timothy. And he had to get that straight or he was going to get everything else wrong. In fact, this isn't only a message for Timothy, this is a message for the entire church. And I've talked a lot about this lately, and so I'm going to just touch on this for half a second more, and we're going to go. But I just want you to notice that this is the same pattern over and over again. If you flip over to Colossians for a second, when the church in Colossae gets the letter from the Apostle Paul, he writes to them about a very similar thing. He says to them, you've got to know how this thing works. You've got to know what power you have. You've got to know how we're going to do this. And so verse 9 of chapter 1 of Colossians says this. Paul says, for this very reason, since the day we heard about you, we have not stopped praying for you. By the way, Paul is concerned about his friends in the Colossian churches. So what is he going to do? He's going to pray for them because he knows that's the power he has. He knows that's the power that'll make any difference. I'm praying for you. That's the very first step. That's the power. I haven't stopped praying for you, asking God to fill you with the knowledge of His will through all spiritual wisdom and understanding. You've got to know God's will. How's that going to come? Through His Word and through all spiritual wisdom and understanding. That's what I'm praying for you. And we pray this in order that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please Him in every way. How are you going to do that? Paul's praying for that for them, that they would have the power to do that, because that's the only power they have. That you would bear fruit in every good work. How's that going to happen? How are you going to bear fruit? It's going to come because we're praying for it and being obedient and living in God's power. You're going to bear fruit in every good work, and you're going to grow in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with what? With all power according to His glorious might. How are you going to do anything good? You're going to do it with the God's power that comes from His glorious might. That's their only answer. It's their only choice. That's their only option. You're going to do this in this way, with God's power. He says you're being strengthened with all power, verse 11, according to his glorious might, so that you might have great endurance and patience, and joyfully giving thanks to the Father. How are you going to keep going? How are you going to keep encouraged? You've got to find the power that's in you. You've got to do it by God's power. That's his answer, again and again. You're going to give thanks to the Father who's qualified you. The Father has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the kingdom of light. The Father has done that. You haven't. You have no power. He has the power. Colossian church, realize you are gifted this by the power of God. For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves, in whom we have redemption and the forgiveness of sins. He has rescued us. He has bought us. He will strengthen us. He will help us bear fruit. He will do all these things. God will do them through you. And Timothy, if you're going to do anything, you've got to know that power. You cannot do it alone. You cannot force it on your own. You cannot have your plans work out. You've got to know the power of God. I remember a couple of years ago I taught through the book of Acts, and I was absolutely shocked. Go and read this sometime. Just go read through Acts and underline how many times it says the Holy Spirit did this. The Spirit led them here. The Spirit opened this door. The Spirit closed this door. The Spirit, God is all over the book of Acts. Somehow, once in a while, we've taught it as if Peter and Paul went out and taught everybody. Well, they went, but it wasn't their power. Sometimes we taught the book of Acts and said the church spread everywhere. Well, of course it spread, but it wasn't because of them. Go read it. Everything hinges on the power of God. And until we believe we have a power beyond ourselves, we will not do very much. Spiritual things are only accomplished in the power of the Spirit. And so Paul says to Timothy, you are not given a spirit of timidity. You're not supposed to be scared, Timothy. You have power beyond what you know. And if you do not know that power, then you'll always be scared. Want to get rid of your fear? Understand what power you have. Timothy, you haven't been given a spirit of fear. You've been given a spirit of power. And then he goes on from there. He said, you've been given a spirit of love. I want you to think about the summertime. Think about somebody, maybe you, starting your lawnmower. Have you ever heard somebody start a lawnmower and it goes like this? And then it starts up and it runs and it goes for a little while. Have you heard your lawnmower doing that? Do you know why it does that? When your lawnmower starts, it goes because it's trying to find its level. It's got a thing called a governor in it. Governor is just this little flap that when the engine is running, it blows a fan and it blows this little flap back and forth. And as that flap goes back and forth, it goes giving it more and less fuel until eventually it sits in the one spot and it runs nicely. It governs it to one spot where it's supposed to run. Without a governor, it would run wide open or it wouldn't run at all. But with a governor, it finds its middle. It finds where it's supposed to run. Anything that runs has a governor. Those of you who remember the old phonographs that you used to wind up and then start, they have a governor, a set of weights that spins, and it keeps it running at the exact right speed. It governs it. The Apostle Paul says, Timothy, you've got a lot of power, but here's the thing you've got to have. You need a governor. You need something so that you use this power well, and your governor is going to be love. You're given a spirit of power and a spirit of love because love is the governor. Love is what tempers our power. Love is what causes us not to take our power and push people around. It's a thing that doesn't make people do what I tell them to do. It's a thing that doesn't allow me to just run over top of people and force people to do what I want them to do. Love is what makes me use my power in a good way. Love is what makes us use that power we have from God in a profitable way. Love is the way that we do godly things well. Love is the governor that allows us to take the truth and bring it to someone. Picture I chose for the PowerPoint is of a parent with a child, right? The parent has all the power. The parent has all the power all the time. I remember when the kids were little, I think I even used this illustration one time. I said, if I take one of my babies and I put them on this table here and I leave for 3 hours, when I come back, they're still on the table. They can't do anything. They're complete. Well, Megan says she would have rolled off. That's what she just did. That's probably true. But they can't get up and leave. They can't go out and drive their own car and go home. They can't go to Dairy Queen. They can't do anything. I've got all the power. I feed them. I dress them. Well, okay, let's be serious. Sarah fed them. Sarah dressed them. Sarah does their hair. They've got nothing. Babies and children are just at our mercy. But it's our love. It's our love for our children that makes us treat them well. It's our love for our children that allows us then to take that power that we have over them and to use it to their benefit. And Paul says to Timothy, Timothy, you will be a great leader where you are if you know the power you have and then you govern it with love. You take that power and then you love people so well that there's nothing you would do that would harm them. You would never use your power to your advantage. You'd use it to theirs. That's why love is so important in a group of people in the church. Because the way we're going to figure out how to use our power is that we are going to love one another. That beautiful passage from Philippians that describes the attitude of Christ. Some of you have this passage up on your wall somewhere. Philippians chapter 2 describes the attitude that Christ had when he came to this earth. And Paul's encouraging them to be like-minded, to be like Christ. And if you're going to be like Christ, he says this to them. In verse 2, if you've got any fellowship with the Spirit of God, if you have any tenderness and compassion. Verse 2 of Philippians 2 says, then make my joy complete by being like-minded and having the same love. Paul says if you want to be like Christ, act like Christ and think like Christ, but also love like Christ. Because love is going to show you the path. Love is going to give you the opportunity. Love is the thing that's going to show you the way home. Love is the filter through which everything has to go. If I cannot teach you or help you in a way that is loving, if I am using my power in any other way, I'm using it incorrectly. Love is the filter for everything else. Paul tells Timothy, you are not to be scared. You have some power. You have a way to use it. He gives him one other one that sounds a little strange, but actually it fits in here very well. The apostle says to him, you've got power, you've got love, and you've been given a spirit of self-discipline. I want to suggest to you that we need to value self-discipline more than we do. The word that they use to translate self-discipline there, that last word in the three, the first two words no one argues about. Everyone knows that the Greek word they use there is for power, and it means God's power. They know that. They know the second one is love, and they've got that one. The third one, if you took 5 different translations, you'd find 5 different translations because it's a word that's really hard to come up with. It's hard to describe what Paul is talking about here. So the NIV says, you've been given a spirit of self-discipline. Some of yours will say you've been given a spirit of correction or teachableness. And they reach for all kinds of words, but that's the idea, that you're teachable. You've been given a spirit that is not ever out of control. You've been given a spirit that's under your management. You've been given a spirit that you are looking over. In other words, what Paul says to Timothy is, you've got some power and you need to love people, but Timothy, your first place to work is you. You need to discipline yourself so that when you go to help other people, you know what it feels like. You know what you ought to do. You know how it is. I think this last one is really important, especially in a group of people, because it's really easy for us to look around and figure out what other people ought to do, right? I can look around and I can figure out what you ought to be doing, or how you can do that to me. You can figure out how I ought to preach this sermon better, how I ought to have led that song better, how I should have chosen different songs, how we should do something else. It's very easy to be critical when you're not the one to do it. Happens all the time. In fact, this past week, not even here, it happens all the time everywhere. This past week, visiting with a friend of mine who coaches basketball, little kids basketball, grade 7s. He got done this game, they won the game, all the kids are celebrating, everybody's happy. He turns around and there's a parent this close to his face saying, "Why did you not play my kid in the 4th quarter?" Right? And he explained, "I played all the kids evenly, everybody got the same floor time, and this parent was about this high off the ground because their kid didn't get played in the right situations, blah, blah, blah." You know what my friend said to them? "You can coach the team." You know what the parent said? Right? Because it's easy to sit on the bench and say, "I know what you're doing wrong. I know what you're not doing great. I can see all the issues." But when someone says, "Well, maybe you ought to do it." The problem is we like to look at what other people aren't doing. We don't necessarily like to look at me. I don't want to look at me. I don't want to think about what I need to change. It's much more fun to think about what you need to change. Right? So Paul says to Timothy, "You know what? Here's what I want you to think about. You've got some power and I want you to love people, but before you do anything, discipline yourself. That's your spirit. I'm going to work on me. I'm going to work on me first." With the idea that because you know what it's like to sort through your own life and know that things aren't quite right and that you're trying your hardest and maybe you've got to fix some stuff that you haven't yet, then you're going to give other people a little more slack when you go and try and help them. Right? If you've applied it to yourself first, then you know what it feels like. This is a taser gun. One of the regulations of most police departments is that if you are registered to carry a taser weapon, one of the requirements is that you must be what? You must be tased first. Right? You don't get to shoot somebody until you've been shot. Because after you've been shot and you've experienced the pain of being tasered, you might think twice before recklessly just tasering everybody else. So Paul says, "Timothy, focus on you. And when you sort yourself out, then you'll know how better to sort other people out." This is a similar idea that Jesus came up with. He told a story in Luke chapter 18, if you want to flip there for half a second. In Luke chapter 18, Jesus told a story about 2 men who went to pray to God. Right? They go up to the temple to pray to God. And it says this, "To some who were confident in their own righteousness." That's not a good thing. That's not a compliment. "To some who were confident in their own righteousness." To some who were using their power and pointing a spotlight on themselves. And looked down on everyone else, by the way, he told this parable. 2 men went to the temple to pray. One a Pharisee, the best guy in town, and one a tax collector, the most hated person in town. The Pharisee stood up and prayed about himself. "God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like that tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Timothy, humble yourself. Realize you're not perfect. Discipline yourself first. Then you'll be a good servant to other people. Then you'll be able to help people when they're struggling. Then you'll know what to say. Maybe this sermon sermon looks a little better upside down. The way Paul gives it talks about the power he has and the love he should use and then the self-discipline. Actually, the sermon runs better the other way. Start with yourself. Discipline yourself, and then in love, go out and use the power God has given you. Timothy, you've got all you need. You've been shaped for this purpose. You are ready to serve. All you got to do is remember these three things. You've got more power than you know. Love can change people. Start with yourself. Brothers and sisters, that's our plan. When you think, I can't do anything here, remember, I've got power, I can love people, and if I work on myself, somebody will see it. When you think, I don't know what to do, think about this, I've got some power, I can love some people, I can see what I can do. Brothers and sisters, the power is there. We can do that. The end of this sermon is probably best given by Paul himself. Because Paul says to Timothy in the next couple of verses, he ends the sermon himself. He gives him the way he's going to keep going and the way he's going to be able to do something more than what Timothy thinks he's going to do. The last few verses say this. So Timothy, don't be ashamed about the testimony of our Lord or me, his prisoner. Don't be scared of that. Don't be ashamed of that. Don't be shy. Don't run away. Don't do that. Timothy, instead, join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. He underlines the word power a second time. Timothy, you've got more power than you know. God has saved us. And he's called us to a holy life. So Timothy, work on yourself. Change yourself. Self-discipline. Start there. Not because of anything we've done, but because of his own grace, his own purpose, and his own grace. In God's love, he saved us. So in God's love, we can go. Through God's power, he has saved us, so we can take that power to others. And we can live a holy life and help others to find that holy life as well. Timothy, don't be scared. You are shaped for this very purpose. Brothers and sisters, you are shaped to serve God. You have what you need. Can you take those thoughts and those ideas and those things and go out and help shape others in the image of God this week as well? Let's stand as we sing.